Hello, Jess. How are you doing today?
Hey Dan, nice to see you. I'm doing well.
Nice, nice to see you too. And you've got a great background, which we were just talking about, an acoustic background. I like to sort of bring people's backgrounds to life. Is that? It's not like a recording studio you're in or anything like that.
No. It's just a home office in the basement, but there is a fake wall we built behind us, and it is made out of acoustic panels to
Ah,
help me have a little space from my toddler upstairs.
oh right, cool. Maybe he or she will make an appearance. You never know.
Let's hope not, actually.
So, Jess, you're the global head of Bloomberg Live Experiences, if I'm not mistaken.
That's correct.
And you have been since I think the summer of 22. For those that aren't aware what a global head of live experience means, and B, I'm sure most people heard of Bloomberg, but maybe not Bloomberg Live. Just give us a flavour as to your role and the I guess the division that you run.
Well, I mean, thank you for the commentary on the acoustic panels, but thank you for having me, which I should just say up front. It's really lovely to be present on your podcast today. So, starting with Global Head, what does that mean? I run a really large cross-functional team. There's about 100 individuals that make up Bloomberg Live Experiences globally, and I am in partnership with my editorial colleagues responsible for setting the strategy, managing the P&L, and really delivering on extraordinary events that really surprise people and allow for us to fulfill our mission. So that sort of dovetails into what is Bloomberg Live Experiences. Our mission is really to create growth for all of Bloomberg. And we do that by world leading live journalism and experiences. And we really focus on that for what we like to think of as ambitious and curious business leaders. So
Sure.
that's really what I spend my days doing, and what we do across the world. So we really make sure that the events that we focus on are for Bloomberg Media, while I do have incredible colleagues who run events for the other divisions of
Okay.
Bloomberg as well.
Thank you. And I believe you're based in New York, and you're not an indigenous American. I'm interested to know my guest background when I have them on and how they sort of fell into the events industry. And I know you've got an interesting story to tell. So sort of roll all the way back and give us a flavour of sort of your upbringing, the early career, and how you sort of fell into this wonderful world of events, please.
I mean, don't you think that everyone falls into events? That's the right way to put it.
Pretty much.
Although, having said that, I grew up in Australia, not an Indigenous American, although the US is now my home. And as you know, little girl Jess in the 80s in Australia was always really excited and interested in my parents' dinner parties. I would always offer to host. I would always love to stand around the corner or up the stairs and sort of listen to the chatter of them gathering their friends. And I think I really was attracted to the rituals and beats of our family lives. And my dad was a barrister, so I would go and sometimes watch him in court. And for me, that was really him putting on a wig and gown, as they do in
Yeah.
Australia, and dressing in a costume and performing these incredible opening and closing arguments. And for me, that felt like monologues. So I really was early on attracted to acting. And I went to acting school really thinking that was what I was going to be pursuing. And at acting school, they really taught us, in my world, the method. So we were really trained in a very traditional way. But they also asked us to do many things, including fencing classes and stage management. And the
Yeah.
stage management and production classes that I did was really something that you had to do for a year before they let you take on a role, audition for a play. And for me, that really set me up so incredibly well. So after I graduated from acting school, I did what so many Aussies do, my pilgrimage to London, and felt like I was going to start acting, auditioning a lot for plays. And in the end, I got a job working on the Edinburgh Fringe Festival. And that was a
Okay.
production job working in an incredible venue called the Gilded Balloon. And doing that work, it made me really understand and think about the power of the experience, that darkened room, and being able to be, yes, an actor on stage, which was what I was drawn to at the time. But more than that, how could we have that incredible memory. And I really think of myself today as a memory painter. And I started to have that opening of the aperture of, I don't have to be the character. I can be facilitating people's experiences in other ways. And so when I came home from working in Scotland and in London and kind of gallivanting around Europe just as a backpacker and seeing a lot of theatre, seeing a lot of live spectacle too, particularly at the Avignon Arts Festival and some of those incredible European festivals, I came back to Australia and really realized that instead of being a bartender and a part-time actor, I could pursue what I loved and really work in the career of events. And I've been doing it ever since.
It's an amazing story. And as you said, pretty much every guest that I've had on has sort of fallen into events. There never used to be this sort of like I don't know, event management opportunity at university or at school, and lots of these graduate programs now that lots of companies have. So it's always fascinating to sort of understand how that sort of manifests itself. Interesting to say, I think that the words you just used, that you see yourself as a memory creator, which I haven't. That's a really great expression, actually, or phrase. I've never heard anyone say that before. Bring that to life. Why do you think that? Is that because of the live experiences, and ultimately, people come on site and they're there to, I guess, make memories of what they do on that day?
Yeah, I mean, look, I think so. I've very, very much been interested in that power of bringing people together and the shared experience. And
Sure.
I think we'll talk a bit about communities here today,
Yeah.
but I often think about that too. And I've been reading a lot about the psychology of bringing people together in space. And we know that a shared experience really gives people a connectivity. This sounds sort of a bit hippie and woo-woo, but a connectivity of our brain waves. And it does actually yield stronger and deeper memories and firmer emotional connections to that. And some of that is that I remember when, and
Sure.
so many of the things that I believe we as a species talk about in our lives are either those celebrations or rituals, or the first time you saw someone speak on stage at a conference or at a university lecture, which really opens up something in your brain and you just think, I want to tell people about that. I want to share that story. That also happens, of course, and in my earlier days, it happened in so many of those festival tents. I, at the Sydney Festival, produced Bon Iver in the Spiegel tent in this really small, intimate setting. And it was so remarkable. And it's a story that I can tell before he was famous, before he was who he is today. That's a sort of unique moment for me. And I think that when we think about the narratives of our lives, so many of them are punctuated by the memories of an event. And how can we, even in the B2B and the corporate space, really lean into that and lean into that with our live journalism and the stories that we can pull apart on our stages.
Sure. Thank you. So you joined, as I said, Bloomberg Media in July 22. It's always interesting when you join an existing, or you join a business which has got the heritage like Bloomberg. You obviously want to make your own mark. You want to see, I guess, what's working and maybe what you can improve upon. Tell us about the division, what it looked like when you arrived, and sort of the journey about how you go about and how you've gone about adapting it.
Yeah, I mean, it's always interesting to enter an organization, and I entered this one at the end of, can we say the end of the pandemic? I'm not sure, but certainly the end of the acute phase.
Yeah, pretty much. Yeah.
And so having a team, or actually two teams that I was brought in to run, Bloomberg New Economy and Bloomberg Live. And they were really structured quite differently. They functioned very differently, although cumulatively they produced about 60 events globally each year. And they were really running against quite different goals and objectives. And so when I took this job, I knew I was coming in to think about what a consolidated event organization could look like, but I also really respected the incredible work that they had been delivering and wanted to find a way to make sure that I could listen and engage with the teams. So didn't do anything more than really listening, observing, thinking, and working with our strategy teams for the first 6 months. And then when we brought the two teams together, we did so under a new banner. And the banner and name of our organization now is Bloomberg Live Experiences. And we wanted to lean into that word experiences to think about what that would deliver for us. And the strategy that the leadership team and I came up with was really to think about anchoring and kind of pairing and pruning the calendar back to larger, higher impact events that were delivering on or had the best power to deliver on our cross-platform media products. So how could we think about scale in TV, radio, print, and of course our incredible digital networks? And so we created a calendar that did that. And then any kind of restructure does come with thinking about what is best for the team. So I structured the activities, so to speak. So thinking about setting the team up with functional expertise and allowing them to have growth and ability to work across projects. And that allowed, from our perspective, the opportunity for functional excellence and that discipline and rigor to be created, but also for people to have the lateral moves to not just get stuck in an event project that they worked in year in, year out, and to allow for us to have more of that scalable, repeatable opportunities, particularly globally. And that is something that we face as a challenge of working on the clock. Someone said to me once, the sun never sets on BLE, and actually that's really true. And then the other thing that we really focused on as I took on this role was the slate. We talk about our event slates, but our calendar of events, and thinking about that being almost a toolkit and to have the right tool for the right audience. Festivals, industry convenings, summits, and economic forums were really part of the bread and butter of the business. But how did we make sure that we had the same discipline as we approached all of those different events and anchored them to the most meaningful areas of coverage and the areas of content for Bloomberg Media, allowing for really the kind of the four core pillars of everything we do: the data-driven live journalism on our main stages, almost a luxurious approach to hospitality and really taking care of people and allowing them to have the most incredible experience, creative design and leaning into that. And lastly, really, and this kind of comes back to the core of who I am and what I've observed across the years, is a really disciplined approach to F&B being additive, exciting, delicious, and local, and doing that where possible in all of our events.
Sure, thank you. Yeah, it's interesting you say that. I think that's definitely changed. Also, we'll come on to talk about it in a minute when you speak about the biology of people and how we should look after that at events, and that sort of plays to inclusion from an F&B perspective, accessibility, and so on. I just want to reference something that you said when you first joined. I'm just reading verbatim. You suggested we can use events to build true communities around our most significant verticals while enhancing experiences for our subscribers and brand partners. What did you mean by that? And has that sort of played out as you would have wished over the last couple of years, looking back, looking forward?
Looking back to
it's always interesting. I always find what I tend to do a lot is actually have, especially if people, let's say, you've joined even like 10 years ago, and they might have forgotten what they said when they first joined. I'm like, how's that worked out for you?
How's that worked out for me? I mean, look, I think it's worked out for me better than I could have ever expected. And that's because I have an unbelievable partner in Julia, our Chief Digital Officer. And she, I think, on a separate podcast said that events and subscriptions go together like peanut butter and chocolate, which I loved. And I think is really true. And this goes back to that community element. And I think when I was sitting in Australia before taking the job, I was really thinking more about our journalism, our verticals, our areas of coverage, and how we could connect people, our readers and our audience members, more deeply with those areas of coverage. But I have been challenged at Bloomberg to think more deeply about what community means. And I think that we find we find ourselves in community. And I say that insofar as it's that search for our people. And I kind of, for those who are listening to the podcast, I'm doing some like air quotes, horrible inverted commas here, but the people that we want to connect with, so often you're surprised when you share, oh, wow, I read that too. I listen to that too. And that is what can give people that unique sense of themselves, the belonging of a community. And it also, particularly as we think about our events, drives people forward from a networking and connectivity perspective. They're hunting for either their next job, their next investment, their next deal, their next person that they need to meet from a networking perspective, either for themselves personally or for their companies and their corporations. And so as we think about communities, we've been experimenting a lot more than I would have expected. We did an incredible, hilarious downtown Lower East Side pub quiz called Fraught Lots with two journalists from the Odd Lots podcast. That was a really rollicking night of almost pub trivia, but anchored in the most niche, incredible, if you don't mind me saying, nerdy kind of content. And I loved just seeing how those people gathered themselves and noticed that they were part of, oh, I listen to Odd Lots every week and I love Tracy and Joe and I've got something in common with these people. And then at the end, we were offering a level of free and upgraded subscription, and we just saw people flock to those QR codes and really want to be gathering that subscription. And so there really can be a virtuous circle between what we do in events and what we're striving to do with our subscription business. I think this is sort of where I warned Dan that I might be a little bit long-winded at times, but I think the other thing to really say is one of the places that I've been able to lean into is our incredible journalists and the communities around them. But how did we think about surfacing them as a host role in our events? And so we did that with Lucas Shaw and our Screen Time event, which we launched last year. We're doing that for the first time with Shanali, who leads a lot of our markets coverage, and she is going to be our host for Bloomberg Invest coming up next week, this week, this Thursday, actually, we have Emily Chang and Brad Stone on stage at Bloomberg Tech in San Francisco. And we really have noticed that people want to get closer to our journalists. And I think we I'm actually impressed that we've made it almost 20 minutes and haven't mentioned AI yet, but I think
we're coming to it.
We're coming to it. Well, I'm going to take us there. I think in the world of AI, the power of live journalism can be even stronger as we think about connecting people directly with our journalists and our hosts. And that is what I think I meant before we joined, but also what I definitely mean now.
Sure, thank you. And just for those, because I don't know when people will listen to this, but you're referring to, we're sitting here on Monday, May the 6th. So I think you were talking about Thursday, May the 9th. So
correct.
I'll pop a link in the bio underneath. So yeah, interesting. Obviously Bloomberg carries such a heritage in its name. I guess there's a weight of expectation in terms of when you're translating that into in-person and live events. I guess if people turn up at a Bloomberg event, they're all of a sudden their expectation of what they're going to receive, if you like, and their experience is got to be heightened. How do you deal with that?
I mean, I think it's heightened. I think any heritage brand, of which I've worked for many, actually comes with that weight of expectation. I think one of the things that I would actually also say is a trend that I'm spotting in events is that we are thinking more about people's pre-event experience and being able to communicate back to people what they should expect from a Bloomberg event. And a lot of that is the heritage of the incredible data-rich journalism that we can provide. And I've sort of said that a number of times, but the real meanings for that is we can allow people to unpack, get inside a story, and that content is then streamed directly to our terminal users who are thinking about the markets, who are working on live transactions, and they are really impacted by our content in real time, which is, I think, an
Sure.
expectation of people as they come to our events, but it is something that we are really thinking more and more about. The weight of the brand also speaks to, I think, the elevated experience that we need to offer. And I've sort of nodded to that when we think about that hospitality mindset, but being able to really make sure that wherever we go, that we have the incredible big screens, access to content, opportunities for connections, and to allow people to really understand that we are providing the context for everything that they can do as they take what they experience at our events forward and offsite after the event.
The use of technology in the design and delivery of events has evolved hugely in recent years, and how we use AI as event planners continues to dominate the conversations. How's that manifesting itself in your teams and in your events?
I mean, the use of AI itself is really something that we are going to come to with a defined approach, and I sort of want to say somewhat slowly, and that is not because we don't see the power of it, but it's very important for us in the work that we do to really use that human eye. I really am excited about where I believe AI can help support event organizers when we think about connectivity between thinking through recaps after a day of content, thinking through the way in which audience connections can be brokered and made. But that is something that we have to be really cautious about. And I also think there's nothing that really can get away from the human touch of, particularly in the level of experience that we need to offer to our very, very senior business leaders. It's so important for us to be creating those one-to-one bilateral meetings and that connectivity. I do think that there is some research support that our team will hopefully get faster at with AI focused on and feeding into that. From our perspective also, so much of the work we do is putting journalists on our stage to be asking questions about AI. So as we think about the events we do, we always make sure that there is a conversation moment that really anchors to an AI topic. Again, this tech event in San Francisco, we have the founders of Anthropic, which is maybe yet to be as famous as OpenAI, but certainly on the rise, one of the largest investments that Amazon has ever made. So I think that's also one of the powers of the way we work with AI, is really to think about the coverage and the story arc and the context for how AI can be used in other businesses. And then lastly, I think on the, let's call it the less predictable tech angle, we are really thinking about the opportunities to have that online offline experience, and how can we create and network people in ways that are beyond the event itself. We're really challenging our team and our tech teams at the moment to think beyond the event app, beyond the wayfinding and the meeting concierge services that a lot of event apps deliver, and to really push that into that community space so that people have utility for our event apps post the event experience themselves, and it can become almost a network of networks. And that is a place where we are really thinking most strongly about event technology today.
Thank you. And you've referenced a couple of times about the changing nature and the demands of people's expectations when they come to an event and event design, and how that's changed. There's been lots of talk around festivalization, I can never say that word, of of B2B events. Worked on the Sydney and New York Times festivals. Can you give us your views on how live B2B events experiences have changed over the last few years, and how you see this developing in the future?
I mean, festivalization it's interesting because it's certainly a trend that I have observed. It's a trend that I actually didn't quite understand was a trend because of my absolute personal history working in festivals. I grew up in festivals. I love them. I think there is nothing better than either the experience of one or creating one for attendees. But when we think about what is great about a festival, it is the wealth of the number of different options that are put in front of you, almost overwhelmingly. You have to choose your own adventure. You have to navigate through a festival. You're allowed to make choices. You're allowed to have FOMO and JOMO. You can think about the fear of missing out on what's happening on that main stage, but the joy of just saying, I'm going to sit in this conversation that's really juicy and rich for me right now. And I think that is where we, as more corporate event producers, can think about adding those elements in. And we are starting to add those elements into really all of our events, and they come to life in different ways. When we think about what's happening off our main stages, those incredible live journalism conversations are anchoring everything we do. But how do we think about the offstage, maybe in more traditional language, the breakout sessions? But what else can we do? We've been playing around with community curators, highlighting people who are members of our community who want to be running workshops. We've been thinking about scenario planning, again, almost that war games of how do we have something that is a longer form convening for a smaller subset of our audience who can really learn and dive into a topic that is of their particular interest. And then how do we think about crafting spaces where there is permission, as I said, for you to miss out, for you to say, the best way for me to attend this event is to maximize the amount of meetings or connections I can have. So I'm going to focus on that. And I know that I can then go home, watch the great content afterwards, share it with my networks, and have an opportunity to attend that on-site event experience for whatever my personal reasons are. And I think that is where festivalization can really make the most sense. And I think that there's a lot to learn from what great festivals can deliver to us, particularly as you think about multiple stages, concurrent programming, and really the user journey and the audience experience that we can deliver for people in small pockets that sit outside of those main rooms.
Sure. Do you still see a room for sort of serendipity at events? Because that was always sort of triumphed as, people bumping into somebody or just coming across something that they'd enjoyed. Because I guess with the use of technology, data-driven insights, it can be a bit sort of, that it's over curated. So do you still think there's opportunity to leave room for that sort of unscripted part of the, attendee journey at an event?
My answer is I hope so. That is why I'm still attracted to what we do, because I think, and this was so true at the Screen Time event, which I've referenced a couple of times, but there was so much about that as a new product that our team tried to build and did build real rigor and discipline around the experience we wanted to create for our attendees. But you don't know until you put people in space together what they will find interesting, how they will interact, what is really going to be their serendipity, their moment of connection. And that is really what is that has to be the power of the in-person experience. That has to be the power of watching something together. And I think that is where those shared experiences and that synchronicity and moments of connection can come from, because there is nothing that you can take away from, and I really even believe this to be true with sport, watching a game, not knowing what the outcome is, that unpredictable outcome, the first time you all watch a show and don't know what the ending is, that moment on stage when the journalist, you don't know what that last question is going to be, where they go for the jugular, and then you walk outside and maybe there's someone standing next to you that you don't know, and you both were like, oh my gosh, did you see that question that Eric Schatzker asked on stage at the New Economy Forum? And then you start a conversation and you don't know where that leads. And we have data points of those conversations leading to major investments, and taking some of the Catalyst class that we have, which is a class of entrepreneurs that we bring into our New Economy community. And they have become unicorns because of some of the serendipity of the connections that have happened at our events. So it's certainly something that we will need to continue with, and I think fight for as event producers beyond what technology can tell us.
Sure. So it's about leaving space for that unknown to happen, I guess. Having a look at this year's calendar, you've got a new event, the Bloomberg Green Festival, which I believe is launching in July in Seattle.
9 weeks. We're counting down.
9 weeks and counting. Tell us about that, but also tell us more broadly how you go about launching a new event concept.
I mean, launching any new event concept, I think, comes down to a bit of rigor, or a lot of rigor, I should say, and some luck and some faith. When I think about the Bloomberg Green Festival, it really was something that had been spoken about well before my time. It had been kind of percolating through the hallways of Bloomberg. And I came to the organization, and together with several leaders in the team, decided that we would push it forward as our first festival. So I think particularly for this team, being able to take us from the next nearest event would be our Qatar Economic Forum, which has 1,500 attendees. The Green Festival, we're thinking about 3,000 plus attendees, and it is an order of magnitude larger, and it is a different type of event. We're thinking about it as the beginning of almost the South by Southwest of climate. So for us, it has some big, hairy, audacious goals. If we think about that, and launching any type of event is hard, but launching that with the backdrop is even harder. And so we started with research. We started with what does our audience want in this space? And we did a piece of global research that helped us to help inform the type of event we could create. And that then led into our strategy. So I think all of these are common to any event product you create. If you can put audience research at the heart of everything you do that first, anchoring and laddering into strategy. The clearer the North Star, the clearer the defined reason you're doing the event, the easier it is for the team to deliver. That's not always true, but if you can, or it's not always the case that a North Star is as clear as we want it to be, but if we can, that allows for that new product to stay on the tracks even when the external forces are pushing or pulling. We then did an extensive RFP, and we're very lucky to work with incredible experiential agencies and partners. But for us, we really wanted to do a global search for the right agency to meet us with the very ambitious creative goals we had for the festival itself. And then from there, it's really about putting trust in the team members and allowing them to really struggle with the problem. We really talk sometimes about working those problems, and the word problem might seem like a bad one, but in this instance, it's not. Events are about putting many, many, many pieces together and having a village of ideas who can all work in their streamlined function, but with the common arc around them. And so we know as we are putting this event together, and I sort of joked about nine weeks to go, but it's in these 9 weeks that the rubber meets the road, where we move past any kind of strategy focus and we get into execution. And that is what event teams thrive in. Those moments where almost the time pressure means that things have to fall away and you get more and more and more focused. And then this is to the point of serendipity. There is still a belief that I have, which is we cannot really know what we're building until it is built. And that is terrifying. But together we can and should have that overlay of almost overambitious goals with the North Star. And that is, I think, how you would launch a new product. And then there's a lot of elements and hard work and marketing that goes into getting those audience members to come along the journey with us.
Sure. And why Seattle, out of interest? How do you go about choosing the right location? And do you work with local government, other individuals on the ground? How does that work?
Yeah, look, I think collecting feedback from our audience, again, in that research was the first thing we did. And we needed to make sure that we had a city that was really delivering on high-level sustainability goals. We wanted to make sure that we were taking this event to a place where they were working as hard as possible to really change their climate future. And we found that in Seattle. We also found a relationship with the city of Seattle as a host for the event, and the work that we're doing with Mayor Harold and the city to really make sure that some of the things that they are doing every day for the citizens of Seattle become test cases that we can showcase as part of our event, and that can support scale. We also wanted to create a relationship with a city that would be like the great kind of event city partnerships that happen. And we focused on a city that wasn't, maybe a core, one of the, first 3 cities in the US that you would list, because we wanted to be able to provide a home and a place to grow together, like Austin and South by, to a degree, like the work that we have seen coming out of even, this is a very, very, very long way back, but Davos and the World Economic Forum, and they become synonymous with a place. And we want our Green Festival to be synonymous with Seattle. And we've had an incredible partnership, not just from the city, but from the populace themselves, just the citizens of Seattle. Every time we talk to someone, they thank us. Why Seattle? And then the next thing is, thank you for coming.
Sure. I had Hugh Forrest, who's the Chief Programming Officer, on the show actually only a few months ago, and he was talking to me about the 30 years of South by Southwest and obviously hosting it in Austin in Texas for that very reason. And obviously the chemistry that's happened between the individuals in the town and in the state, and the symbiotic relationship between the show and everything that goes on there as well. So I guess that's the sort of thing that you're trying to achieve when you pick a location like Seattle.
And a lot of people have that. I mean, I think that I've listed a couple, but Aspen Ideas Festival, has that in its name. TED have got an incredible relationship with Vancouver now after I think 5 or 6, maybe 7 or 8 years even. So there is some good proxies and case studies for how this can work. And we really hope to be able to achieve that with the Green Festival in Seattle too.
Sure. And the live events calendar includes events all over the globe. So obviously in the US, Saudi Arabia, Hong Kong, Singapore. And I speak to lots of people who run events in many different places. And I'm always interested to understand what they believe. And I'll ask you, what are the considerations and challenges of running a global event portfolio? And maybe how's that changed even over the last couple of years?
I mean, I think the change of that is that we are better and better supported by technology. I think that I ran a global team at the New York Times prior to COVID. And what I have found since joining Bloomberg is the practice we all had on Zoom does allow for those virtual meetings with global teams to be a better proxy for in-person. I still don't believe it is as good as the in-person moment, but certainly that has been a change. I think when we think about our global events, some of it comes down to the personal. That is, whose turn is it to have an early night or a late morning? How do we make sure that our teams, particularly in Asia, are not just at the end of every decision-making cycle? And how do we empower those centers of local decision-making and not to have our head office in the US pushing all of the strategy down? And I think that's an art. We haven't quite got there, but it's something that my team are really, really thinking about this year. We also need to be really cautious and think about the global and cultural nuances. I think about that a lot as an Aussie living in the US, which is probably a very easy proxy, but the more that we can challenge our teams to think about what those local nuances are, what are the cultural behaviors, how do we address people, what are the things we need to do to show up appropriately in each of these cities and places, is something that we are very cognizant of. And then I know there's a lot of event professionals listening to this, and this might be super boring for those who are more in the creative space, but there's so much we have to think about around localization, language, tax, imports, exports. I mean, we're thinking about doing events with new cities that we don't have offices in, and the amount of pressure that puts on our local tax teams is really unbelievable, and certainly not something that I thought about before joining Bloomberg. But they are all of the many considerations about running a global team. And I think we do have to be really responsive to what is happening around the world at any moment. And so that really requires people to be thinking not just about the event itself, but what is happening in that city and what is happening in that region.
And I guess it's also important to find the right partners on the ground, suppliers, obviously the venues, the whole, ecosystem that goes into running that event. It's not just a case of just, turning up and running it. You're going to have to literally, find the right people that know the culture, as you said.
Absolutely. And I think that the partners that we have who do that really well create long-term relationships on the ground, or have been willing to work with us to even stand up a local office in a region that they know that we're going to be working in for a long period of time. And I know that particularly actually our agency partner on the World Economic Forum in Davos has specific personal relationships with people who run those shops in Davos when they are absolutely shops and when they're not just the houses of all of the brands who come for the World Economic Forum. And that is where we are able to really think about the respect and the relationships that can happen on the ground, because events kind of helicopter in and out, and we need to make sure that there is a ecosystem and an economy that is maybe better for us having been there. And that is something that we really think about and respect at Bloomberg.
Sure. You've spoken before about the importance of taking care of people's biology at events. What did you mean by that?
Well, I'm going to have to source the credit for that one, because that is not something that I said for the first time myself. That came from June Cohen, actually, who used to say it to the team at TED. And she used to say, you take care of people's biology and we'll let the content take care of itself. And when I first heard that, it was so resonant to me, and almost resonant to me, the little girl in Australia thinking about hospitality and making sure everyone was taken care of. But for me, when I think about it, it's about, how do we make sure the air conditioning isn't too hot, too cold? How do we have a seamless registration experience? How do we make sure that the food and beverage is delicious and, as you said, equitable and thinks about people who have dietary requirements? How do we make sure that our content is accessible? How can we think about all of the things that we can do as event producers to make sure that those ticks, the things that annoy our audiences, the things that distract them, how do we take that away so that they can have the best chance to focus on the content, yes, but also the connections that they make at the events? And we really do have some power in that. And that is where our teams are exceptional. And we really think about that. And we think about that with everything that we do. And so I often quote June and that, that moment of taking care of people's biology.
Okay, thank you. And what's your most memorable experience working on an event, and why? I guess you've worked on hundreds. Years. Is there one sort of single standout moment?
So, yes, I think so. I mean, hundreds of events is right. And the events that I've worked on are so different. And so many of the kind of personal moments of connection have come from standing backstage, watching 100,000 sweaty Sydney-siders dance to Manu Chao. And a colleague of mine whispered to me, and she just said, can you see the joy rising? And you could. It was literally palpable to see people have that experience. And that's very memorable. But when I know that you had asked me this question, and so I had a bit of time to think about this one. And for me, actually, the most memorable experience was a tech conference that I worked on with the New York Times. And we were on Half Moon Bay, and an incredibly large storm hit, and we lost all power. So we did a tech conference with no technology. The team just kicked into action. We put battery-powered candles on the stage, and you could just see that everyone started to lean in more as all of their devices started to die because they didn't have anything to charge it with. And as the intimacy of almost a candlelit conversation around technology, the journalists had permission to be both harder and softer, more personal, more connectivity. And then the team, just the amount of support I saw for each other. They jumped to action. Nothing was too big or too small. How did we find a generator? How were we making sure Adobe could still stream the content that they were obligated to have as a sponsor? How did we make sure that we fed people when on day 2, still on the peninsula, no power? How could we think about gathering our conference folks and putting them with the other people who were on site? So it really became both a moment of memory for the teamwork that I saw, but also just tech event without technology, something to be said for that.
Thank you. And finally, Jess, what do you see as the key trends appearing over the next 1, 2, and 3 years? If we had you back on the show, if I was still doing it in 3 years,
please,
3, 4, 5 years time, what are the sort of trends that you think are going to sort of manifest during that time in the event space?
I mean, one of the trends that I have observed a lot, and I think it's really in the last 7 or 8 months, is smaller events. And the thing that is interesting about that trend is we're almost running opposite to that trend. And I said that when we thought about the strategy, rather than 60 events, we're now doing 14. Those events have larger impact. And so what we think about is networks of niches within those events, and how do we make sure that we can give people the experience of a smaller event, even within this large high impact event. And so I think that's where we're still playing, and that's a trend that we will keep spotting and thinking about. We're able to deliver that with a 15-person round table in a 1,000-person event. So that's something we play with. I think I mentioned this, but I'm seeing more and more the trend of events starting before the event itself. Yeah. And that is about preparing people's experience. That is also about respecting how finite the gift of time is, and how do we allow people to make the most of that experience of the event. So preparing people's attendance, communicating with them in the right way, nurturing that audience is really something that I've spotted, but also we're trying to work on. And lastly, it's also, and this is enabled by technology, but how do we think more and more about community and connections, and really thinking about the opportunities for us to have that online, offline space that we as event professionals were sort of forced into during the pandemic, and how can we make that meaningful again in the post maybe hybrid event world.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Jess. Fascinating insights. We wish you the best of luck with all of your events, especially, I guess, the launch of the new one in Seattle. We look forward to seeing how that develops over the coming weeks, months, and years. Thank you for being on the show today.
Thank you so much, Dan. It was really such a pleasure.